everyone. I'm welcoming you to the second session of the intermediate stream, and we're very pleased to welcome Sandy Freeman, who will be presenting about enmity and the gratitude in World War II. And Sandy says that stamp collecting was an expected hobby within a family collectors, and I know about that. In 1957, post-war, my dad was transferred to what was known as Western Germany, trading Canadian used commemorative issues received from relatives back home for the illegal to own German military propaganda cancels, maybe mainly CTO Uncover, became a clandestine lesson for a 10-year-old with my dad along for security. I love that. Today, wartime philatelic collectibles are surfacing via estates. I am one happy hunter. So with that, I'm going to close one window and share Sandy's presentation. And I will turn it over to you, Sandy.
The enmity and/or gratitude can be expressed in a multitude of ways. Propaganda and lies, by any means, are presented to guide the gullible. My presentation is focused on the World War II era, the Allies versus the Axis. Revolting ideologies and indoctrination such as Nazism, fascism, and socialism have resulted in the desegregation and/or the annihilation of the Jews, the Gypsy, the Romas, and any other undesirables as dictated by Hitler. And why? They were not true German Aryans. And a little comment that the majority of the postcards are artist-signed. Now, you've noticed on the postcard here is the caricature of the three Axis leaders. So Hirohito of Japan, Benito Mussolini in the middle, and Adolf Hitler towards the right, and then our famous chamber pot. The thing a lot of people don't realize that Hitler's actual surname is Schicklgruber. And the story behind it was that his stepfather had changed the surname to Heider, Heidler, but when they immigrated to Germany, the pronunciation was more like Hitler, and that's the way it stayed. Next. Nazi Socialist German Workers' Party. That is the official name of the Nazi Party. And they were a far-right political party in Germany, active between the 1920s and 1945. And it created and supported the ideology of Nazism. The postcard on the far left is entitled The Federal Party Day, and it was held in Nuremberg. And if you look what is featured, one of the soldiers holding the Nazi flag, and down below, the backside of this card is more important to a philatelist, in that it's almost past the first day of issue. And it's canceled on site at the Reich Partzone. On the diagonal red cancellation was the boarding pass by air to go to Dresden. And in the lower left, the circle canceled is the arrival in Dresden. Next. Now, the 11th Olympic Summer Games were held in Berlin, and they were actually entitled Hitler and the Nazis Olympics. And featured on here is the Goebbels on the left, Hitler in the middle, and all his henchmen in between. And Hitler had hoped the spectacle would showcase Germany's rebirth and promote Nazi ideals of racial supremacy and anti-Semitism. But the German sports served to promote the myth of Aryan, but the majority of the German athletes were not Aryan. So therefore, a lot of them were eliminated from the games. And then on the bottom right, we're all familiar with Jesse Owens. And he was the track and field athletes that won the most awards, set records, etc. But he was a black and an American. But he was credited with the single-handedly crushing Hitler's myth of Aryan supremacy. And the other thing was when he went back home to his own country, again, he was faced with the ostracism of Black Americans, with not even a handshake between Hitler or even his own President Roosevelt. Next. The Munich Agreement. And you wonder why it's showing four guys kind of having a dance. And somebody else had inscribed on the front of it, the European Peace Walk. Well, after First World War had officially ended with the signing of the Treaty of Versailles and the cessation back to Belgium, memo to Lithuania, etc., Hitler wanted this settlement on the condition that Germany have the territory of Sudetenland, which was part of Western Czechoslovakia. And just previously, he had annexed Austria. So the four characters doing their little dancing is the Prime Minister Chamberlain from Britain, Hitler, Mussolini, and then the President of France. Next. Now this card is honoring the Munich Agreement. And across the top is one people, one country, one leader. The big red blob in the middle of the card is the outline of Czechoslovakia. The bottom right is the territory of Sudetenland. And over in the far left, a little chunk taken out of Hungary. This territory was renamed the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. And this is where all the German Aryans had lived. So naturally, you see the Nazi symbol of the eagle sitting on its pedestal. Next. These cards were issued in France. And it's a good caricature of a storefront. And Hitler is the respectable manager. So in the middle is Goering. And the blurb on his little booth is articles reserved for the exportation to Poland, France, and Britain. A selection of torpedoes and rifle bullets. On the left is Hitler's booth. Daily ration dates for the German preparation. And I like the one on the far right, which is Goebbels. And he stuttered so bad. The manufacture of venomous vipers, choice of ducks, nourishings for the fools, the idiots, the snakes, and stupid girl. The one on the bottom is entitled, Well, the fool is one who relies on it. And in the far left, it's Hitler with a dagger trying to defend himself against the Polish soldier. In the middle, it's called Today, and it's the Polish soldier turning ranks, and he is stabbing Hitler. And the third one, labeled Tomorrow, the body is dumped down the sewer. Next. This was also issued in French, and it's entitled Hitler the First, the King of Liars. If you notice in the background, there's a record player going, and it's pumping out propaganda for peace, Bolshevikism, common enemy number one, good relations, etc. And His Royal Highness is sitting on this throne with a domestic duck on his crown. The scepter features a puppet of an airman playing with a toy airplane. And his orb features a puppet soldier carrying a sign reading propaganda. And the same artist also did the bottom card, and it's basically entitled Hitler is having bad dreams. So naturally he's wondering, will my life eventually end by guillotine or by being hung? Next. Now, the United States, if you remember, there was 3 countries that were neutral at the beginning of the war, and that was Sweden, Switzerland, and the United States. So Nancy Roosevelt felt there's got to be some financial benefit of this. And Britain came forward and said, we need help with war materials. So the United States came up with a deal called Anglo-American Loan. So in this case, it was called a cash and carry for military rights to British bases in the Caribbean were traded for equipment, such as destroyers, tanks, you name it. Then they changed the name again to Lend and Leash. And what is featured on the first card is a dog doing what it normally does, but into a German war helmet, labeled Hitler War Fund. And the lower card, the Anglo-American Loan changed its title again, the dog doing his business, on a fictitious newspaper called the Hollywood Press, and labeled this as what we think of the Hitler Gang. Next. Now, the Canadian students were also involved in the war effort, and they were all handed out this little folder called Passbook, Pupils' War Savings. It was a large piece of paper folded 4 times. On the reverse side, in the blue, is we commandos need your help. On the bottom right is a sheet of supposed to be 16 labels. So every time a student got a donation, one of these labels was pasted on the inside of the passbook. And then eventually turned into a bank or the teacher with the donations, and a new passbook was issued. Next. Now this is a banknote from France in the 20-franc denomination, which was the common denomination at that time. And it was entitled Hitler Throttled. And it was issued by the French World War II underground partisans. And it features a fisherman drawing on a rope with a so-called cash. In this case, he's pulling up a fishing net. But I have seen similar bills, and that catch was actually Hitler's head noosed. And the reverse side of the bill is showing 3 generations of the women with their local cultural headdresses. But I'd like to comment down on the lower left. Counterfeiting will be punished with forced labor for life. If you're still living. Next. Italy was one of the Axis countries, and this is entitled The Battle of the Mediterranean Sea. And it was basically between the Italian Navy, sponsored with other Axis partners, and the British Royal Navy. And outside of the Pacific theater of war, the Mediterranean saw the largest conventional naval warfare. And the British plan was to hold on 3 of their key properties, which was the Rock of Gibraltar, Malta, and the Suez Canal. And actually features both the Nazi and the Italian eagle diving after a whale. And the text on the back of the card, the fascist wing will always prevail in the Mediterranean race. Next. Again, Italy. And this particular artist, Botticelli, was a supporter of Mussolini and of the fascist ideology. And being so well known, he was given a commission to produce propaganda material for his government. So he was enlisted into the Italian SS division. So featured on here for 1941, if you remember when we were kids, we were always told our fillings were made of gold. So they named this innocent person John Bull, and it's showing a Nazi and an Italian pulling the teeth out of it. And constantly the propaganda, admit defeat, surrender. We are here to help you. Next. Another one of his cards, and it's showing a cadet preceding a massive Axis army. And if you notice in the back, all the flags from the different countries that the Nazis had already occupied. On the reverse side of this card is a reprint, and it's very poor quality of cardstock. And the propaganda message reads, Auxiliary Military Armed Forces Federation of the Fascist Combatants and in Venezuela. And over on the far left vertically, victory. Next. Now this is an air-dropped leaflet. And it was done by British and Allied forces with a message to the Arabs in Tripoli. The translation is on the reverse side of that leaflet, entitled The British and the Arab and the Allied Forces Come with Friends. Instead of hardship and oppression, we bring to the Arab population peace and friendship. The Italian and Germans have been beaten. We know they weren't. In their retreat from Tripoli without taking into account your interest and destroying your water supply, etc. In your interest, we offer this advice. Stop all work for the Italians and Germans if you do not want to be considered our enemy. Impede the Italians and Germans by destroying their food supply. When our final attack comes, distance yourself from the danger zone and cooperate quietly and quickly to every request made by the victorious British forces. And as I said, the message above was simple and reflected the attitude of both the Allied and the Axis forces when they dropped these leaflets. Next. The Soviet Union. Next. The Soviet Union was, what should I say, in war with each other, issuing all their cards. This particular one, the surname that they're using is an alias, and it was made up of 3 letters within the surname of 3 different artists. In this case, it's entitled, We Will Mercifully Smash and Destroy the Enemy. And if you notice, a Soviet soldier trying to stab a rat coming out of a newspaper. And it's interesting to know, even Canada did this. Anytime they wanted to display something against an enemy, it was always a rat. Now, this card was issued during Germany's Operation Barbarossa, which means red beer. And they had broken a treaty they had made previously with the Soviet Union. And instead, they wanted their access east to get into the Soviet Union to occupy it. So immediately, all of the Western European countries were starting to rearm. Next. Now, the American industry wanted to also get involved, and this is entitled The Battle of the Atlantic, and it's featuring the American merchant marines lifting machinery up onto the ship. The who is pinned underneath it, effigy heads of the 3-axis needle. So the merchant marines, not only in the United States, but also Canada. Canadians had the largest merchant marine service in both world wars. Next. Now this is called Operation Overlord. And when the United States finally joined the war because of the invasion of Pearl Harbor, their General Eisenhower was chosen as the supreme commander of the Allied Expeditionary Forces in Europe. And who's tucked under his left arm? Naturally, Adolf Hitler, and he's being administered a good case of corporal punishment. Next. Now, the liberation of Paris. Within any war, normally the capital city of that country is trying to be liberated first before they break out into the whole country. So this is known as the Battle of Paris in Belgium. And Paris had been ruled by Nazi Germany ever since 1940, in which the Wehrmacht occupied the northern and the western corners. Now, featured here is an American tank coming through and its equipment in behind. What we see is the Germans trying to get away. They're climbing trees, stealing people's bikes, and to take their food along. You see them pulling pigs and riding a cow, as if that's going to get them anywhere. But this operation began with the Free French forces along with the U.S. Third Army. And then with the Spanish Civil War had just completed, all their people came over to fight with the Nazis. Next. Now this starts with the liberation of France. And this particular artist issued oodles of them. The left-hand card features a single black crow or raven, and is not only the symbol of mystery, but also the omen of death. The rooster crowing had been used as a Christian symbol prophesying betrayal and defeat. And this is all listed in the 4 Gospels. The lower right one shows the German officer going into the pigeon coop to get one. During wartime, they often used pigeons to send on messages, but all the pigeons are dead. And right over top of him with the aircraft trying to drop weapons is also labeled with the Luftwaffe has been decimated. Next. Now the Netherlands had fun, and they labeled this as the Axis clowns. The left-hand one shows Hitler hanging on the Olympic rings, and Mussolini boringly watching him, and it was dated 1943. The lower right, in their English sarcasm, has translated it, in this year, Hitler can't complete his stunt without Mussolini's support. And actually, Mussolini is trying to hold him up. Next. Again, the Netherlands. They decided to start producing good prisoner of war uniforms, and they nicknamed this the Quisling uniform. On the top one is the 3 German leaders, and the little Dutch sign underneath, because we fought against England. And that's Kogel, Hitler, and Dominitz. The lower right is more Germans. And the poster that's being held, the little white poster, is labeled People and Fatherland. But the text underneath is the flower of the nation, come and see. Next. Now, the American artists had fun, and one company did all the publishing. And this is titled Slam the Axis. And again, dog doing the same thing instead of the fire hydrant, and he's using Hitler's mouth. The lower one is the same thing that the Axis forces were doing with the Jew. In this case, it's Uncle Sam pulling Hitler's teeth. And the other 2, Mussolini and Hero Leader, reading their term. And it's called The Yanks Are Coming. Next. Now, who could imagine these 3 active leaders being inside a church and in a choir ground? And it's labeled the Unholy 3. The right-hand one is an effigy of the Axis, 3 heads, and they're sitting on the tail end of a jackass, and labeled 3 of a kind. Next. Again, part of the same series, and showing Hitler in a coffin. And I love the verse, we are going to bury Hitler face down. Then he should come to life and start to dig. He will dig his way into hell. And actually the bottom one is a globe of the world. And it's repeating, I feel loudly with these pests. These pests are worms with the faces of the three-axis leader mixed. Now these two cards are historical, and this is the signing of the surrender of Germany in 1945. The text on the back of both cards are the rule of the capitulation of the Collège Mondial de Technique de l'Îles, the 7th of May, 1945. And the general, 3 different generals of the German army and Navy are signing their documents. On the lower one is the Soviet Union representatives. And I couldn't begin to pronounce their names. They're doing their signing. Now in the West, the 8th of May is known as Victoria in Europe Day. In the East, because of the time change, the 9th of May is known as Victory Day. So in the post-Soviet states, the definitive signing had occurred after midnight Moscow time. So even though 3 versions were signed, only the English and the French are the authoritative ones. Next. Now, Netherlands Liberation Day. You'll notice in the upper right card is a Canadian soldier walking away with his little souvenirs. So a German war helmet, a bazooka. That's to say it's an eagle that's been noosed. On his shoulder is the German Navy flag, etc. Now, if you remember, the Canadians were given the chore, if you will, by General Eisenhower to start eliminating the Netherlands. That they were starting. And this particular period was named the Hunger Winter. So there was 2 Canadian generals fighting in the Netherlands. They approached their German commanders to try and make a deal to drop your weapons, we would drop ours, let us bring in food to feed the starving Dutch. And eventually it worked that way. So with the signing of Reims, in the background was the Dutch representation of Prince Bernhard. The lower picture is a photo, and it's showing German soldiers being disarmed by the troops of the 1st Canadian Corps. Next. So can I go back to that one, Jane? On the upper corner, it looks like rain or snowflakes. And what it really is Canadian maple leaves to the ground. And that's how much the Dutch people still respect Canadians. Next. Now, the United States and Japan. And this features Hideki Tojo. And he was a Japanese politician and became the supreme commander of the Japanese military. Now, the text on this card is written as we would hear an Eastern Asian trying to speak English. And always during wartime, the media featured the Japanese with the buck teeth. So Tojo is very happy, sends congratulations to you for being absent last week and losing man hours. Next. Again with Japan, this is what they named the Operation Hawaii, and it was the attack on Pearl Harbor. And what is featured is a body being stabbed, and the body is labeled Pearl Harbor. And actually the Japan soldier doing the stabbing. But then Uncle Sam's arm comes into the picture trying to grab the Japanese out of the picture. And this military action, the invasion, was a surprise strike. The United States had expected. They were neutral up to this point, and then they had to declare war on Japan and drop their neutrality. Next. Now, Japan was having fun on the United States with their cards. This one's entitled Our Enemy is Only the Americans. And I love their crazy text. We do not wish to point our guns at you, as shown in this picture, but this is impossible to avoid only you. Brother Filipinos, understand our real intention and escape from the American force. Join us immediately and be safe. Next. Another one is Roosevelt, the world enemy #1. Next. To the American soldiers. Japan has strived its furious attack on you. There won't be anything left for you but to collapse. With your handful force, you won't get any place. So, while you still have your life, it is best for you to go home. Recognize that Japan's new order in Asia and gives the independence to the Philippines. And if you wish to know, this is called the real Monroe Doctrine. But if you remember your history, the Monroe Doctrine, the original version was issued in 1823 by the U.S. Foreign Service. And it was aimed towards the Western Hemisphere nations, warning these European nations that the U.S. would not tolerate further colonization or puppet monarchs. Now, the Japanese thought this was a good idea, so they drew up their doctrine for Eastern Asia. And it arose after the Russian-Japanese War of 1904. So while they were carrying on their aggressive foreign policy, it was used to block the expansion of Eastern European powers for Northern China and Korea. Next. And again, Japan with another card, the Battle of Southeast Asia. So again, this was issued for anyone that tried to get into China. Next. Now, Australia, they pretty well looked after the invasion of the Japanese in their part of the world. And this is an air leaflet dropped over Japan occupied Indonesia. And the translation is on the next page. Okay, the Australians have labeled it Leaf M108 dropped over Japanese occupied Indonesia, with the official English translation in Indonesian from military records. And as you can say, it's the red in Indonesia fighting men from the Timor guerrilla forces join in a war loan rally. These Indonesian soldiers have a good reputation in Australia. Perhaps it won't be so long until they return to Indonesia to chase out the Japs. At that time, you should not be slow in helping them, and in no account help the Japanese. And remember the slogan, the Japanese chased out means Indonesia glorious and prosperous. Helping the Japanese means Indonesia despised and buried. Next. Now, I had started with a Canada card. This is also a propaganda card from Canada. And it's actually a cover of what you would call an envelope. And it's a private patriotic cover using water paints. In 1944, the painting of the flag colors, if you notice, is red and blue. Those are the two dominant colors within all of the Axis flags. Not the black and yellow of Germany, the green of Italy, etc. Now you notice the 3 stars with the center VI Roman numerals on the blue side, each for the Axis members from Germany, Italy, and Japan. These small stars versus the big, large V were victory logos. The wreath of peace, being larger, suggests the dominance of the Allied forces over the Axis forces. Now, the BI, BI, and BI within those stars equal 6, 6, and 6. And that's the number of the beast as revealed in the Bible on Revelations 13, verse 18, which sometimes is linked to the devil, the Antichrist, and even evil in general. And with this cover addressed to a reverend, it's the book of Revelations, a strong factor. Now I want to do a little summation for you. With the annual Day of Remembrance in 2 days, please give your thanks to those who have pledged their allegiance to their country to rid us of the oppressors in whatever way they could, lest we forget. And if you have another moment, I would like to offer you some food for thought. During the 20th century, there were 2 major world wars. This presentation that I'm giving is based on the second one. Now it is the 21st century with a multitude of skirmishes. In retrospect, the enmity and the propaganda, also known as hate and lies, are again the dominating factors. Modern weaponry has created a duplicate scenario of the segregation and the annihilation of the undefeated and undefended globals. So repatriation to go down in history is another big legacy of oppression. So will history label this present aggression that we are in right now as World War III? And this is the end, and thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'd love to answer them. I'll pass them on to Bob. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandy. I've seen some propaganda cards over the years, but never so many accumulated in one collection. And you've done so much research into all the characters and the meanings and the symbols. Do you have source material that you rely on for?
The majority of these propaganda cards and what I have in my collection, there are no publications, catalogs that give any history on them.
Yeah.
Basically, you've got to know your World War II history or find it that. In this case, I went to the Calgary Museum for the regiments to interpret some of them. And actually living over there post-war, seeing the damage, gives the inspiration to show what's going on.
Wow. Fascinating. Are there any other questions?
No question, Sandy, but I thought that was an amazing set of material that you have there. Make sure make sure it goes into good hands.
Can you suggest one or some?
I don't I don't know your personal situation, Sandy, so I'm going to leave it at that. But just yeah, it can't stay buried. That's all I'm getting at.
No, I agree with you, Phil. Thank you.
I had the opportunity to live in a place called Chalon-sur-Saône in France, and it was on the demarcation line between Free France and occupied France. And we lived there. While we lived there, there were a couple of anniversaries.
Marocha line?
Pardon me?
Was that the Marion line?
Perhaps.
It doesn't matter. They had 2 lines. So.
Yes, yeah, I can't remember which one it was, but what I found interesting was the hospital was on an island in the middle of the river. And there was a lot of back and forth about which side of the line the hospital would lie on. Whether who would get to use the hospital. But eventually, I think they did work out some sort of agreement where both sides could use the hospital. But then I think it also led to some sneaking back and forth across the lines.
Really.
But no, it was kind of an interesting place to hear about the history. I didn't realize when we moved there that that was where the demarcation line ended up. So
Well, talking with one of the veterans here in the city, he had noticed the two cards I made reference to the Bible on. And he said the only thing we experienced with the enemy, and this was in southern France, was that any of the ministers, priests, whatever, that were with your battalion, as long as they had their white collar on and raised their white flag, that they could go between the troops to administer the last rites or whatever was needed. You know, and just the thought of it, I got goosebumps again.
no, it's fascinating. Well, I think at this point I'm going to stop the recording.